The first time I realized something was wrong was when I saw strangers walking up my driveway, pointing at my cabin as if it were theirs to buy. My blood boiled when I spotted the sign at the end of the road for sale, cabin with scenic lake view, except that was my cabin. My land, my sweat and money. The HOA had gone too far this time, inviting a realtor to tour my property like it was some open house. They never asked. They never even told me. I had warned them before to keep their hands off my place, but apparently, greed doesn't listen. So, I did what any rightful owner would do. I locked my gate, posted my own sign in bold red letters, and waited for them to come back. If they wanted a fight, they just stepped into the wrong battlefield. The cabin had always been my safe place. The one corner of the world where the noise of other people's demands couldn't reach me. Built by my grandfather in the late 60s. It wasn't a mansion, and it certainly wasn't modern, but it carried the kind of character no cookie-cutter house in a suburban subdivision could ever match. The logs were weathered dark from years of rain and sun. The stone chimney stood proud and rough, built by hand. Inside it smelled of pine, wood, and coffee, with shelves stacked full of fishing gear and books older than I was. To me, it wasn't just property. It was history, it was family, it was mine. That was why the Homeowners Association's constant attempts to interfere always made my blood simmer. The HOA wasn't even supposed to have authority over my cabin. Their neighborhood started a mile down the road, behind their fancy gated entrance, where all the houses looked like replicas of one another. They lived under rules that told them what color to paint their shutters, how tall their grass could grow, and even when they could put their trash bins out. I had no part in it. My land sat on the edge of the lake, just far enough away to escape their leash. But in their eyes, that didn't matter. They wanted everything near their community to look like it belonged to them. And I, with my cabin and my independence, didn't fit their picture. For years, I ignored their letters. Every few months, a white envelope would show up in my mailbox, full of polite but forceful words about how my unregulated property was bringing down the value of their homes. Sometimes they said my firewood pile was unsightly. Sometimes they complained that my truck, parked by the shed, didn't meet neighborhood standards. Other times, they simply demanded I join their association. I tossed those letters in the fireplace where they belonged. I wasn't about to pay anyone fees to tell me how to live on my own land, but their persistence grew worse. One time I caught a landscaping crew at the edge of my property, measuring the grass near the road. When I confronted them, they claimed the HOA had hired them to assess the improvements needed. I nearly threw them off my driveway myself. Another time, a board member stopped by uninvited and hinted that if I didn't comply, the HOA would have to take further steps. I didn't bother to ask what those steps were. I simply reminded him he was trespassing and told him never to set foot on my land again. They always backed down when I showed them I wasn't afraid. That Saturday morning started like any other. The sun rose over the lake, painting the surface with gold. I had coffee steaming in my hand and the sound of birds in my ears as I stood on the porch. After breakfast, I decided to split some logs out back for the coming winter. Swinging an axe was work, but it was the kind that cleared your head. I had just stacked another row of wood when I heard the sound of tires crunching on the gravel driveway. At first I thought it was a delivery truck or maybe a neighbor who'd taken a wrong turn, but then I saw the shiny black SUV pull up, polished, so clean it reflected the trees. The driver stepped out first. He was dressed sharp, in a navy suit and shiny shoes that had never touched a dirt trail. He carried a leather folder under his arm. From the back seat came a couple, maybe in their 40s, wearing hiking boots and smiling like they were about to see something exciting. They looked around with wide eyes, whispering to each other as though they'd stumbled upon treasure. My stomach tightened. Something about the way they carried themselves didn't sit right. The man in the suit approached me with a professional smile. "Good morning," he said. "Are you the owner here?" I nodded slowly. "Yes, why?" He opened his folder and glanced at the papers inside. "I'm here to show the property. We've got some interested buyers." For a moment I thought I had misheard him. "Show what property?" I asked, lowering the axe to the ground. "This is my cabin." His smile faltered. He looked again at his paperwork, then pointed toward the road. "The sign at the end of the drive says this cabin is listed for sale. I'm the realtor assigned." I blinked, trying to process what he had just said. "Listed this cabin isn't for sale. Not now. Not ever." My voice had an edge to it, sharper than the axe blade resting in the dirt. The couple behind him exchanged confused glances. "We saw the listing online," the woman explained hesitantly. "It said lakeside cabin, private property, move-in ready. We thought it was perfect." My chest burned hot with anger. Somebody had actually listed my cabin, my land, as if it were theirs to sell. My fists clenched at my sides. "There's been a mistake," I said firmly, locking eyes with the realtor. "This place isn't on the market. Whoever told you otherwise lied." The realtor shifted uncomfortably. "Well, the listing came directly through the HOA office. They sent me the details, photos, and paperwork for prospective buyers." He hesitated, scanning the cabin as though trying to confirm. I assumed everything was legitimate. I laughed bitterly. "Legitimate? The HOA has no authority here. They don't own a square inch of this land. You've been misled, my friend." The couple looked embarrassed. mumbling apologies before retreating back toward the SUV. The realtor closed his folder, clearly annoyed but more cautious now. I'll need to clear this up with the association, he said stiffly. This is highly irregular. I'll clear it up myself, I growled, but not with words. They want to play games with my home. They'll learn I don't play fair when someone comes after what's mine. As the SUV rolled back down the driveway, I strode after them, heading straight for the road. Sure enough, there it was. A brand new sign, planted firmly in the ground. At the entrance to my property, big white letters on a green background read, "For sale, scenic lakeside cabin." At the bottom was a phone number and the HOAS logo. My heart pounded as I stared at it, my jaw clenched so hard it hurt. They hadn't even bothered to hide their hand. They had claimed my cabin outright, bold as daylight. For a long moment, I considered ripping it out of the ground with my bare hands, but then a better idea came to me. They wanted to send a message that my land was theirs. I'd send one back, loud and clear. I dragged the sign out of the dirt and tossed it to the side. Then I fetched one of my old boards from the shed, the kind I used for repairs. With a thick brush and a can of red paint, I scrawled the words, in capital letters that no one could misunderstand. Private property, not for SALE trespassers, will be prosecuted. The letters bled across the board like a warning written in fire. When I was done, I nailed it to the gate at the front of my driveway. The wood echoed with each strike of the hammer, ringing out like a declaration of war. Next, I dragged heavy chains across the gate and locked them with a thick padlock. My cabin wasn't a house you could just stroll into for an open house. If they wanted to come back, they'd have to break through steel. And if they tried, they'd find me waiting. That night, as the crickets sang outside and the lake reflected the moonlight, I sat on the porch with a shotgun resting across my lap. I wasn't planning to shoot anyone unless they gave me a reason, but I wanted to send a clear message. This land wasn't up for grabs. Not today. Not ever. In the silence, I thought about how far the HOA had pushed things this time. It wasn't just letters anymore. It wasn't empty threats. They had crossed a line into fraud, pretending they could sell something they didn't own. And I knew people like them didn't stop once they tasted power. They would come back, furious, demanding, maybe even dangerous. But I was ready, and I swore to myself right then that no one, not a realtor, not a board president, not an entire association was ever going to steal my cabin from me. The next morning, the air was thick with the smell of pine sap and damp soil, but I couldn't enjoy it the way I usually did. My mind was heavy with what had happened the day before. The boldness of that sign, the nerve of them inviting a realtor to my land as if it belonged to them, gnawed at me like a dog worrying a bone. I had seen the HOA's tricks before, but this was no trick. This was theft. And the more I thought about it, the more it sank in that they would not back down easily. By mid-morning, I was repairing a loose board on the porch when the sound of tires on gravel returned. I stood slowly, wiping sweat and sawdust from my hands, and looked toward the gate. A silver sedan rolled to a stop, its paint gleaming under the sun. The driver's door swung open, and out stepped Karen, the HOA president herself. Her reputation preceded her. She had that sharp, polished look, the kind of woman who treated every situation like a board meeting she had to dominate. She wore a red jacket too formal for the woods and carried a binder so thick it looked like she'd prepared a case against me in court. Her heels clicked on the gravel as she approached the locked gate, stopping just a foot away from my big, freshly painted sign. She stood there staring at it, her lips tightening into a thin line. After a long silence, she looked up at me on the porch. Her eyes narrowed like she was assessing a problem she planned to solve. "Mr. Harris," called out, her voice clipped and commanding. "We need to talk." I walked down the steps slowly, planting each boot on the ground with purpose. I stopped just short of the gate, close enough to see the irritation flashing in her eyes. "Talk about what?" I said evenly. She gestured toward my sign with the tip of her manicured finger. "This," she said sharply. "This is unacceptable. You've put up an aggressive, hostile message that reflects very poorly on our community. We can't allow this kind of display." I almost laughed in her face. "You can't allow it," I repeated. "Karen, this isn't your community. This is my land. That sign is my business, and the only reason it's there is because your people tried to sell what doesn't belong to you." Her cheeks reddened slightly, but she didn't flinch. "The listing was a misunderstanding," she said quickly, though her voice wavered just a bit. "An error in communication. But your response, locking your gate, putting up this threatening sign, that makes you look unreasonable. Buyers and realtors are already talking. You're damaging the neighborhood's reputation." Now, I did laugh, a short, hard sound that cut through the morning air. "Damaging your reputation? You tried to sell my cabin like it was an abandoned shack. If anyone's reputation is ruined, it's yours, not mine." Karen's jaw tightened. She clutched her binder closer, like it was a shield. "You don't understand, Mr. Harris," she said firmly. "The properties around this lake are part of an association. We manage the area for the good of everyone. That includes keeping up appearances. Your cabin is an anomaly, a rustic one, yes, but an anomaly nonetheless. We've received numerous complaints. If you would simply agree to join the HOA, these conflicts could be resolved smoothly. There it was, the same demand I had heard for years, but now dressed up in firmer clothes. I shook my head. I'll never pay you a dime, I said flatly. I've lived here long before your subdivision even existed. My deed is clear. My boundaries are clear. Your rules stop at the edge of your gate, and they sure as hell don't reach this cabin. For the first time, Karen's professional mask cracked. Her lips pulled back, and her eyes narrowed into slits. If you insist on being stubborn, she hissed, you'll only make this harder for yourself. The HOA has legal options. I stepped closer to the gate, gripping the steel chain that wrapped around it, letting the clinking sound underscore my words. Legal options, I repeated. The only legal option you have is to stay on your side of the line. Try anything, else and I'll have the sheriff out here before you can blink. Her nostrils flared, and for a long moment we stared at each other through the gate, like two chess players staring the other to make the next move. Finally, she turned sharply on her heel and stalked back to her car. She yanked the door open, tossed her binder into the passenger seat, and slammed it shut. As the engine roared to life, she rolled down her window and spat her parting words. You'll regret this, Mr. Harris, mark my words. I stood there unmoved, watching as her sedan sped down the road, a trail of dust rising behind it. I didn't doubt for a second that she meant her threat, but I also didn't doubt my resolve. That evening, as the sun sank low and painted the lake in shades of fire, I thought about what had just unfolded. Karen wasn't just annoyed. She was furious. Furious that I had embarrassed her in front of a realtor, furious that I had made her look powerless in front of her own board. People like her didn't forget humiliation. They plotted, they schemed, and I knew she was already hatching her next move. I sat at the porch table with my coffee growing cold, pulling out the old deed to my land. The pages were yellowed, the ink faded, but the words were clear as day. My grandfather's name, later transferred to my father, and finally to me. The property lines were marked in precise detail, stretching right up to the lake's edge. The HOA had no jurisdiction here. I traced the borders with my finger, as if reminding myself of the fortress I was defending. The quiet of the woods felt different that night. Every snap of a twig, every rustle of leaves set me on edge. I kept the shotgun leaning by the door and the padlock key in my pocket. I didn't think Karen would do something reckless so soon, but I also knew desperation made people bold. She had power in her own world, and I had stripped it from her at my gate. That kind of wound doesn't heal fast. Days passed without incident, though I kept catching glimpses of unfamiliar cars slowing near the driveway, drivers rolling down their windows to look at the sign. Some were curious neighbors, others maybe spies for the HOA. I ignored them, but the tension stayed. Then, late one afternoon, I found a fresh envelope in my mailbox. The HOA seal glared at me from the corner. I opened it right there, standing in the gravel, and scanned the words. They were filing a complaint. According to them, my sign violated community aesthetic standards and constituted an eyesore detrimental to property values. They demanded I remove it immediately or face legal action. I tore the letter in half, then in quarters, and let the scraps flutter into the trash. Legal action, I thought. They wouldn't dare. But in the back of my mind, I wondered how far Karen would go. That night, under the hum of crickets, I sat on the porch again, staring at the locked gate in the moonlight. I could feel the storm building, the weight of something bigger pressing in from beyond the trees. This wasn't just about a sign anymore. It wasn't even about my cabin. It was about control, about whether they could bend me into their system. And as I sipped the last of my cold coffee, I made a promise to myself. If they thought they could wear me down, they were wrong. If they thought they could drag me into their games, they'd regret it. This was my land, my family's land, and no HOA president, no board, no polished realtor was ever going to take it away. I leaned back, listening to the woods breathe around me. The night was calm for now, but deep down, I knew this was only the beginning. Karen wasn't done, and neither was I. The following week dragged on with a strange heaviness, as if the woods themselves were holding their breath. I went about my days the way I always did, splitting wood, checking my fishing lines, walking the trails around the lake, but there was no peace in the routine. Every time I walked down to the gate, I half expected to see something new. Another sign planted by the HOA, another car parked at the edge of the drive, another stranger snooping where they didn't belong. My sign still stood bold and red, nailed to the gate with chains holding it fast. No one had dared to touch it yet, but I knew it wouldn't stay that way forever. On Wednesday afternoon, the sound of gravel shifting under tires broke the silence again. This time, it wasn't a realtor's sleek SUV or Karen's polished sedan. Two sheriff's department vehicles rolled to a stop just beyond the gate, their decals gleaming in the sunlight. The crunch of their doors opening echoed in the still air. Out stepped two deputies, both tall, both armed, their expressions professional but wary. Behind them, climbing out of her car with that same binder in hand, was Karen. She looked smug, almost triumphant, as though she had finally brought the weight of the law down on me. I wiped the sweat from my brow, leaned the axe against a stump, and walked to the gate. My heart beat steady. not because I was guilty of anything, but because I knew exactly what this was: another play. Another attempt to scare me into surrender. "Afternoon, sir," one of the deputies said politely. His voice carried the tone of a man who wanted to keep things calm. "We had a call from the homeowners association. They're claiming you've put up an unauthorized sign that violates community regulations." Karen stepped forward quickly, cutting in before I could speak. "Not just unauthorized," she said, her voice rising, threatening. "That sign is aggressive and hostile. It's frightening residents. He's creating an unsafe atmosphere in our neighborhood." I let her finish, then folded my arms across my chest. "Deputy," I said evenly, looking at the taller of the two, "this cabin, this land, it doesn't belong to the HOA. It never has. They don't write rules out here. That sign is on my property, and it's there because they tried to sell it out from under me." The deputy frowned, glancing at his partner, then back at Karen. "Sell it? Can you explain that?" Karen shifted uncomfortably. "That's irrelevant," she snapped. "The point is, he's displaying a hostile sign, and it violates our community standards. It must be removed immediately." I pulled a folded piece of paper from my pocket, the same one I had been carrying since this nonsense began. It was a copy of my deed, clear and stamped. I held it up so the deputies could see. "This says otherwise," I said firmly. "This land has been in my family for decades. It's not within their subdivision, it's not under their control, and it's not subject to their rules. The only thing hostile around here is their attempt to claim what isn't theirs." The deputies leaned closer to read, then stepped back. One of them scratched his chin. "Ma'am," he said, turning to Karen, "if this deed is accurate, then the association doesn't have jurisdiction over his property, which means his sign isn't your concern." Karen's face flushed red, her lips tightening as she tried to recover. "But this is about safety. He's threatening people with prosecution. That's intimidation." I didn't raise my voice, but I let steel edge into it. "It's not intimidation when you're warning trespassers to stay off land that doesn't belong to them. It's a legal right. And if you want to test it, Karen, go ahead and touch that sign yourself. I'll be on the phone to the sheriff's office before you've taken the nails out." The deputy held up a hand, clearly trying to keep the situation from boiling over. "All right, that's enough. No laws are being broken here, ma'am. You can't call us out here for civil disputes that don't involve criminal behavior. If this land isn't under your HOA, then this isn't your fight," Karen sputtered, her binder clutched against her chest like a lifeline. "You can't just let him," but the deputy cut her off. "We're not here to enforce HOA rules. We're here to enforce the law, and the law says he's within his rights." It was the first time I'd seen her truly silenced. Her mouth opened, then closed again, as though the words had dried up in her throat. For a brief second, she looked small, stripped of the authority she carried so proudly. But then the mask slid back into place, and she stood straighter, her eyes narrowing at me. "This isn't over," she hissed, before turning sharply on her heel and storming back to her car. The deputies exchanged a glance, then offered me a small nod. "Sorry for the trouble, sir," one of them said. "We'll quit. Note in our report that no violation was found." I thanked them, though my eyes stayed locked on Karen's car as it sped away. She might have lost this round, but I knew she wasn't done. People like her never admitted defeat. They just looked for another angle. That night, I sat on the porch, with the shotgun across my lap again, the cool air brushing against my skin. The confrontation replayed in my head, every word, every glare. Karen had tried to drag the law into her fight, and it had backfired. But if she was bold enough to bring deputies once, what would she try next? Over the next few days, the tension grew thicker. A couple of times I caught cars idling on the road, their headlights cutting through the dusk as they lingered near my gate. Once, I found tire tracks in the dirt near the edge of the property, as though someone had pulled off the road to snoop. I didn't catch anyone directly, but I could feel the eyes on me. The HOA was watching, circling like vultures. Then came the second letter. It wasn't like the first. This one was longer, more formal, laced with legal jargon that almost managed to sound convincing. They accused me of creating a public nuisance, of endangering community harmony, of damaging property values through hostile displays. At the end, they demanded a formal mediation meeting with their board to resolve the matter amicably. I crumpled the letter into a ball and tossed it straight into the fireplace. "Amicably," I muttered to myself as the flames swallowed. I knew what amicably meant in their language. It meant me bending the knee, signing their papers, and giving them control. That was never going to happen. Still, the weight of their persistence was real. They had money, lawyers, connections. They could keep pushing, keep harassing, keep chipping away. And though I stood firm, I couldn't shake the unease crawling at the back of my mind. On Friday night, just after dark, I heard something unusual, a clatter near the gate. I grabbed the flashlight and the shotgun, moving swiftly down the driveway. The beam of light cut through the shadows, and there it was. Someone had thrown a rock at my sign. The wood was splintered where it had struck, the red paint chipped, the chain still held, the board still stood, but the message was clear. They were testing me. I stood there in the dark, the lake whispering behind me, and tightened my grip on the shotgun. This wasn't just about rules anymore. It wasn't about property values or appearances. This was a battle for ownership, for pride, for control, and as the night closed in around me, I knew Chapter 1 had only been a warning shot. The real fight was still coming. The rock that had chipped my sign was still lying in the dirt the next morning when I walked down to the gate. I picked it up, heavy in my palm, and turned it over slowly. It wasn't the size of the stone that mattered, it was the message. Someone had stood on that road under the cover of night, staring at my cabin through the trees, and decided to make a move. A coward's move, maybe, but a move nonetheless. I tossed the rock into the woods and tightened the chains on the gate. The day passed with a tension I couldn't shake. Every sound in the trees felt sharper, every gust of wind like a whisper of warning. I tried to busy myself with chores, fixing the roof shingles, checking the boat engine, but my eyes kept drifting back toward the road. By afternoon, a gnawing sense of unease had grown into something heavier. The way the sky feels before a storm breaks, just before dusk. The rumble came, not the quiet crunch of a sedan or SUV, but the deep, throaty growl of heavy engines. I froze mid-step on the porch and looked down the driveway. Dust clouds rose above the treetops as 3 large trucks came into view, 2 pickups loaded with equipment, and 1 flatbed hauling what looked like a small backhoe. My pulse quickened. Contractors. The convoy pulled up just outside my gate, engines idling, headlights glaring against the chains. Men climbed out, hard hats, tool belts, clipboards in hand. They looked like they had been hired for a job, not a confrontation. Behind them, a familiar silver sedan rolled up, and sure enough, Karen stepped out in her red jacket, binder tucked under her arm. She walked like a queen leading her army. I came down off the porch, my boots crunching on the gravel, and stopped at the gate with my arms crossed. "What's this?" I called out, my voice sharp. Karen's lips curved into a thin smile. "Good evening, Mr. Harris. We're here to begin improvements." She gestured toward the men and the backhoe. The board voted unanimously. "We're clearing the unsightly debris around your property and preparing it for potential buyers." I laughed, a bitter, humorless sound that echoed off the trees. "Improvements? You mean trespassing? You think I'm going to let you send bulldozers onto my land?" Karen tilted her head slightly, her expression condescending. "You don't have a choice. You're damaging the neighborhood's image, and the HOA is within its rights to intervene. These men have contracts signed and ready. If you unlock that gate now, we can complete the work quickly, and this unpleasant matter can be put behind us." The contractors shifted uneasily, glancing from Karen to me. It was clear they hadn't expected resistance. To them, it was just another job site. To me, it was home. I leaned against the gate, letting the steel chain rattle in my grip. "You so much as set 1 foot on this side," I said slowly, "and you'll be committing trespass. And I promise you the sheriff will be out here before you finish unloading a shovel." One of the contractors cleared his throat. "Ma'am," he said quietly to Karen, "if this is his property, we can't." Karen snapped her binder open and shoved papers at him. "It's within the community's jurisdiction," she insisted. "The association has authority." I stepped closer, raising my voice. "Read the deed," I barked. "Not her binder. My land isn't part of your subdivision, and no vote you hold changes that. You're standing on county road. Everything past this gate belongs to me." The contractors hesitated, whispering among themselves. Karen's face turned crimson with frustration. "Do you really want this to get ugly, Mr. Harris?" she hissed. "You can't hold out forever. We will take control of this cabin, whether you like it or not." I let a slow smile spread across my face, the kind that carried more warning than humor. "Try me." For a long, tense moment, no one moved. The backhoe engine idled, the metal clanking as the driver shifted nervously in his seat. Finally, one of the contractors stepped forward and spoke up. "Look, lady," he said to Karen, "I'm not risking arrest for a landscaping job. If this man's deed says he owns it, then that's the law. We're not crossing his fence." Karen turned on him furiously, but the rest of the crew were already climbing back into their pickups. One by one, engines roared to life, and the convoy began to turn back down the road. Only the flatbed hesitated, the backhoe driver waiting for Karen's signal. She stood frozen, binder trembling in her hands, her pride unraveling as her plan collapsed. When the last truck pulled away, she whipped around to glare at me. "You think you've won something?" she spat. "This isn't the end. I'll bring lawyers. I'll bring the county. You'll be forced out, one way or another." I didn't answer. I just tapped the padlock with my knuckle, the clang of steel ringing through the fading light. Then I turned my back and walked toward the cabin, leaving her shouting empty threats behind me. That night, the silence of the woods was broken only by the crackling of the fire in my hearth. But even as the flames danced, my mind wouldn't rest. They had tried to send contractors. What would be next? A lawsuit. More false complaints. I knew Karen well enough now to understand she wouldn't stop until she had either broken me or been broken herself. The next morning proved me right. Another envelope waited in my mailbox, heavier than before. I opened it slowly, scanning the thick stack of papers inside. A formal notice of legal action filed by the HOA claiming I was in violation of community ordinances and demanding either compliance or removal of the cabin itself. Removal. They were trying to erase it completely. I sank onto the porch step, the papers shaking in my hands. For a moment, anger burned so hot I thought I might tear them apart and throw them in the fire like the others. But I stopped myself. No, this wasn't another bluff I could laugh off. They had taken it to court. That meant I needed more than stubbornness. I needed proof, witnesses, and the law itself on my side. As the sun rose higher over the lake, I folded the papers neatly and set them on the table. Karen had drawn her line, bold and clear. And now, the real war had begun. The day Karen called the sheriff on me and lost her case should have been the end of the HOA's nonsense. For any reasonable group of people, that humiliation would have been enough to make them walk away quietly, but the HOA had never been reasonable. Their president, Karen, thrived on control, and letting me win was simply not something she could stomach. I knew that as long as she had power, she would keep finding ways to needle me. Still, after the sheriff had shut her down in front of witnesses, I thought I might at least get a few weeks of peace. I underestimated just how petty she could be. The days that followed were strangely calm. The cabin sat in silence except for the hum of cicadas and the occasional cry of a bird by the lake. I split logs, worked on fixing the dock, and even had a couple of quiet fishing mornings where I didn't have to look over my shoulder. My sign stood proudly at the gate, warning, off trespassers, and for once it seemed to work. But beneath that calm was a tension I couldn't shake. It was the same feeling you get right before a storm breaks. I knew Karen wasn't finished. I just didn't know what shape her next move would take. It came on a Thursday afternoon. I had just come back from town, groceries in the back of my truck, when I saw a group of people standing near the locked gate. They weren't neighbors I recognized, and their clothes screamed City Wealth pressed shirts, spotless sneakers, designer sunglasses. One of them, a tall man with slicked back hair, waved at me as if I were some kind of tour guide. "Are you the caretaker?" he asked casually. I almost laughed. Caretaker. I parked the truck, walked up, and said, "No, I'm the owner." There. Smiles faltered. They looked at one another awkwardly before the tall man spoke again. "That's odd. The HOA told us this property was for sale. We were told we could get a private viewing today." My grip on the grocery bag tightened until I thought the handles might snap. There it was, the storm I had been waiting for. Karen had gone behind my back again, doubling down after being told to stay away. I explained to the group, calmly at first, that the property wasn't for sale, that the HOA had no authority over it, and that they had been lied to. They looked embarrassed, muttered apologies, and walked back toward their shiny SUV. But what bothered me most wasn't them. It was the fact that Karen was still running her scam, still using my land as some bargaining chip in her little empire. She hadn't just ignored the sheriff's warning. She had doubled her efforts. That night, I sat on the porch of the cabin, staring out at the lake, and thought about my options. I could go back to the sheriff, but something told me Karen would keep twisting the rules until she found a loophole. She had money, influence, and friends on the HOA board who enabled her madness. If I wanted this to stop for good, I would need to do more than react. I would need to make an example out of them, one so strong they would never dare to cross me again. The plan formed slowly, but once it did, it felt sharp as a blade. I gathered every document I had, the deed to my land, maps of the property, lines, and even letters from the county confirming my ownership. Then, I reached out to a friend who worked at the local paper. She loved a good story, especially when it involved small-town power struggles. I explained everything: the false sign, the fake sale, the realtor visits, and Karen's outrageous behavior. She listened carefully, then asked me one question: "Are you ready for this to get public?" I thought about it. Public meant eyes on me, attention, maybe even headlines. But it also meant shining a light on the HOA's shady dealings. Karen thrived in shadows, manipulating people who didn't know better. Exposure was her weakness. "Yes," I said firmly, "I'm ready." The article ran 2 weeks later. It wasn't just a small piece, either. It was front-page material in the county paper. The headline read, "Homeowner Fights Back Against HOA's Illegal Property Sale." Inside was a full breakdown of what had happened, complete with photos of my cabin, the fake for sale sign, and even a shot of Karen at one of her infamous board meetings. The article named names, detailed the sheriff's involvement, and painted the HOA as greedy bullies. The effect was immediate. My phone rang off the hook with neighbors and strangers alike, most of them supportive, some of them sharing their own horror stories about HOA abuse. Apparently, I wasn't the only one they had pushed around. A few even hinted that Karen had tried similar stunts with other properties, though none had fought back as loudly as I had. The more people talked, the worse it looked for the HOA. Karen, of course, was furious. She showed up at my gate again, this time with 2 board members in tow, screaming about defamation and lawsuits. I didn't even let her finish before I pulled out my phone and started recording. "Say it all again?" I told her calmly. "Because every word you say is going online tonight." That shut her up faster than any sheriff could. She turned on her heel, dragging the board members with her, but I could see the fear in her eyes. For once, She knew she wasn't in control. The real hammer dropped a week later. The county sent inspectors to audit the HOA's books after the article raised questions about their financial practices. It turned out they had been misusing funds for years, spending homeowners' dues on personal luxuries, vacations, and even realtor partnerships like the one they tried with my cabin. Karen was forced to resign as president. Several board members followed her out the door, either by choice or by pressure. What had once been a powerful little clique crumbled almost overnight under the weight of exposure. I didn't celebrate loudly. That wasn't my style. But the first night after the news broke, I sat on my porch with a cold drink, watching the sun dip below the trees, and felt something I hadn't felt in months. Peace. The sign at the gate stayed, not as a threat but as a reminder. My cabin was mine. No HOA, no Karen, no fake realtor could ever take that away again. Neighbors who had once looked the other way started waving when they drove past. Some even stopped by to thank me for standing up, saying I had given them courage to push back on smaller issues they'd been too afraid to fight. It was strange, becoming a kind of symbol in the community, but it felt good to know my battle had meant something beyond just keeping my cabin safe. As for Karen, I heard she sold her house quietly and moved out of town. Her reputation ruined. She was no longer the queen of her little kingdom, and without her crown, she had nothing left to cling to. The realtor who first came to my cabin never showed his face again, probably too embarrassed by being caught in the middle of her scheme. Life at the cabin returned to what it should have been all along: simple, quiet, and mine. The lake sparkled in the mornings, the firewood stacked neatly for the coming winter, and my porch became my sanctuary again. I knew challenges would always come. Life as a way of testing you, but after surviving this, I felt unshakable. Sometimes at night, I look at the gate with the bold red letters of my sign and smile, not because I enjoy warning people off, but because it reminds me of the moment I stood my ground and refused to be bullied. That sign isn't just for trespassers, it's for me, too. A promise that I'll never let anyone take what's mine. HOA had tried to sell my cabin, to erase me from my own land. Instead, they ended up selling their own power, piece by piece, until nothing was left. And all it took to stop them was a locked gate, a painted sign, and the refusal to back down. If you enjoyed this powerful story, make sure to like, share, comment, and subscribe for more real-life inspired stories on my channel Bright Reality.